This is the M3 iMac, and I really wanted it to take over as my main computer. The design of it is absolutely stunning, and in my home office setup, it looked utterly beautiful. I really liked it. But unfortunately, this wasn't the computer for me, and that really broke my heart. So today I wanted to talk about all the good things, all the bad things, and why in the end it wasn't for me. So let's get into it. Let's talk about the design of this computer first, because honestly, this is one of the main reasons I really did like it. This is the most stunning computer I think I've ever used, and if you haven't seen one in person, it's really worth going to see. I never actually saw one till quite late on because I don't live near an Apple store anywhere, but seeing it in person, and especially seeing it in a home setup, really changed my view of it. This thing's utterly beautiful. I really think this is one of the best computer designs I've ever seen. It's unbelievably thin while remaining powerful, and the fact that it's got a white bezel just helps it bleed into any background. I actually really like it. And even the point down to where the box has a color matched handle, which is just all this attention to detail, which I really like. This even bleeds across to the software because all the buttons and clicks and all the things like that are green as well, which match up with the computer, which is just such a nice touch. I know a lot of people out there will be worried about the chin, but to me the chin kind of makes this the iMac. If they were to take that away and just have like a white bezeled screen, it would kind of look like anything, but having that chin in there kind of gives it that iMac look. And I know that's not going to be for everybody, but for me I think that's completely okay, and it really builds into kind of the overall aesthetic. This thing is so slim that the headphone port is on the left hand side and it goes into the computer because the headphone jack itself is longer than the iMac as a whole, which is just absolutely ludicrous. But overall, I love this design language. The accessories you get in the box are great too. They're color matched with a color matched wire, which is obviously really nice, but I actually think they're pretty decent. The Apple Magic Keyboard is really nice, and I'm usually a mechanical keyboard user, but I don't mind this at all, and having Touch ID on it is amazing. And you also get the Apple mouse or trackpad in it as well, and I would absolutely recommend going for the trackpad over the mouse, because the Apple mouse is generally just not a great mouse. It's not very ergonomic to use, and you can't use and charge it at the same time because it charges through the bottom, which is a long overdue design change which just hasn't happened yet. Also, Apple make the best trackpads out there. You won't be able to find a better trackpad than the one you get in the box here, so I'd absolutely recommend going for that. There's loads of better mice out there, but the trackpad cannot be beat. The only thing I really hate about the accessories, and this is Apple's chance to kind of get rid of Lightning altogether, is they still connect and charge through Lightning, which is just ridiculous. Even the iPhone now has moved over to USB-C, and they could have done that here with the keyboard and the trackpad, and they haven't. It's still Lightning. I don't know why. It should be USB-C. One of the highlight features here though is the screen, and this is a 24-inch 4.5K display, and it's absolutely wonderful. It's really glossy. I'm getting a lot more reflections on here than I ever did with my studio display, but overall it's really nice, and I think the 24 inches isn't actually too bad. I'm coming from the 27-inch studio display, and coming to this was kind of a bit weird to get used to, but once I changed the display settings to show more, I actually got on with it really well. I could totally get used to this screen size and not have any issues at all, and because it's 4.5K, you get no weird scaling issues with macOS, which is great. What's also mad about this design is this computer's slimmer than a studio display, and it's got an entire computer built into it, whereas the studio display is just a display. Oh, and if you do like the wallpapers in this video, these are part of my bound wallpaper pack, and they look absolutely stunning across desktop, tablet and mobile, and they come in a bunch of colors too. So if you want to check them out, I'll leave them linked in the description below. Okay, let's talk about performance. This has got Apple's newer M3 chip in it, and I've got the 10 GPU version with the 8 cores for standard CPU stuff, and generally speaking, it's really good. I've said this a few times, that when you get a new Mac nowadays, especially with the Apple Silicon stuff, when you open up apps and things like that, it feels more like an iPhone. Everything's like razor quick, instant, and for all your everyday stuff, this computer feels really quick, and a lot of the time that's kind of all you'd ever need from a computer like this. But of course, I've pushed this computer a little bit harder because I am a creator. I'm constantly doing video and photo work and things like that. So I edited the last video in its entirety on this iMac, and the experience was pretty good. What I did notice though, which is the first time I've ever heard it on these kind of M-powered computers, is the fan came on. On my M1 Pro MacBook Pro and my M1 Max Mac Studio, I've never ever heard the fans come on, but it did when I was using this M3. That's just while I was cutting and editing footage, and you can barely hear it, but I definitely felt it come on, which was kind of like an interesting thing. I've never heard that before, but it still held up really well. And if I turned Final Cut back to better performance mode, the fan turned off pretty much instantly. And to really test the power, I did a quick video export test. So the last video which I made, which was the best tech of the year, on my M1 Max Mac Studio, that took 6 minutes and 16 seconds. On my M1 Pro MacBook Pro, it took 12 minutes on the dot. And on this brand new M3 iMac, it took 12 minutes and 37 seconds. So despite having the newer chip, those Pro and Max models really are much better for pushing power. During those exports, no fan or anything like that came on across all three, which was still quite interesting to note as well. Overall performance is really great until you start pushing it kind of graphically or anything like that, and that's where those M1 Pro and Max chips just come in and they do a lot better jobs. I also did a quick gaming test on here as well, because Apple are pushing a bit of gaming now, especially with the M3 stuff, with the hardware accelerated ray tracing and things like that. And what I can say is it ran games kind of okay. And I'm talking about AAA new ones. So I tried Baldur's Gate 3 on here and Resident Evil 4, and on 1080p kind of mid settings, it looked and ran fine. I will say the Metal FX upscaling looked kind of weird in some areas where everything was like overly sharp, but generally speaking, it ran those games well. But what I will say is, I still don't think a Mac is a right place to play games. If you were to spend the same amount and build your own PC or to buy a PC, you're just going to get a much better gaming experience over there. So don't buy this expecting to run the latest games at the best settings or anything like that. It's just not going to happen. The Mac is still a long way off that, but it's getting better all the time. So I've made it pretty clear I really like this iMac despite its drawbacks. But what I will say is there's plenty of stuff which still doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And first up, no computer that starts over £1,400 should come with 8GB of RAM and 256GB of storage. It's just so low, and for a lot of people that'll probably do all of the kind of everyday tasks fine, but 8GB of RAM, even on Apple Silicon, which handles it really well, is going to be out of date in a few years' time. And at that high price point, I think it's just a really mean place to start. And 256GB of storage as well is so low. This is kind of designed to be one of those like family computers that everybody uses, and if you've got like 2 or 3 people using it, 256GB is just really low. Like a lot of phones have way more than that. And if people are storing their files and all those sorts of things, then it's just such a small amount of storage. You're going to want at least 512GB. The other thing I don't like either is when you start building those things into it. So if you up the storage and you up the RAM, then you start falling into MacBook Pro categories of pricing. And it's like, do you spend your money there instead? And then for a little bit more, you can go for like a 16-inch MacBook Pro or something like that. So this again is another victim of the Apple kind of pricing ladder. Some things on the hardware as well, which I think is really strange they didn't put in, is there's no SD card slot here. If this iMac is supposed to be for kind of new creatives or for people getting into a creative space, not having an SD card slot feels like a really, really strange kind of decision to make. And it brings us unfortunately back to using a dongle, which is what I had to do. And the other thing as well is if you buy one of the lower models or the entry level models, you only get 2 USB-C slots on the back, and the keyboard you get with it, you don't get Touch ID, which kind of feels really unfair. And as mentioned, the accessories are still using Lightning rather than USB-C, and the mouse still charges like a madman. So after using this Mac for about 3 weeks non-stop, all those kind of bad points slowly built up to the point where I just couldn't use this Mac as my main computer. And it really broke my heart because, man, I want this thing to be my computer. I would absolutely love it. I'd even get behind the 24-inch screen size if Apple would just put an M3 Pro or an M3 Max chip in there. And look, I know these computers aren't designed for that, but I know a huge amount of creators such as me were waiting for kind of the iMac Pro. And while I was using this, that's all I could think about was like, wow, if Apple put in one of the beefier chips into here, then that would be incredible. I'd love to have this all-in-one computer as a complete creator station and base my entire workflow around it. But unfortunately, that M3 chip just isn't purely designed for those beefier workflows. And that's completely okay. It is supposed to be a family computer. What it has made me realize though is perhaps I need to bite the bullet and just get a studio display for my home setup and to plug my MacBook Pro into that directly. So this computer is clearly not for me. So who is it actually for? And if you check on Apple's website, all the marketing around it is kind of this family kind of computer. And that's clearly what it was made for. But it did make me think, does that space kind of exist anymore? When I was younger, the family computer was kind of like a mainstay where you'd have a separate room for it directly, and you used to have to wrestle your siblings to go on it after school. But that's not really the case anymore, or at least not what I see. The phone, the tablet, and the laptop has kind of taken over from that space, and most people have their own personal devices now, and not a home one. But obviously that space must still exist a little bit, and this computer is a wonderful plug for that gap. I can also imagine it in lots of shops and kind of small design studios where people would need to do creative work occasionally, but not all of the time, and just need a fast and rapid computer for everything else. And the computer really does nail the fundamentals. It's got an incredible screen, it's got really good mic array with a really good webcam built in. You get the keyboard and the mouse or trackpad with it and the power cable, and it's all packaged up in this wonderful design. And like I said, I wish I could have it. I wish I could put a Pro chip in it, but I can't. And that kind of wraps up my overall thoughts on the M3 iMac. I really do think it's a wonderful computer, and I'm gutted that it's not for me. Anyway, if you enjoyed the video, pop a like. If you're using one of these M3 iMacs or one of the earlier ones, let me know in the comments below what you use it for and what your workflows are like, and I will see you all in the next one.